This is the second lecture video on sex and gender. I'm going to continue where we left off with the previous one, talking about some of the terminology, specifically because the terminology is changing so rapidly, and talk more about gender roles and discuss or begin our conversation about social stratification. So we left off last time. We were on the second box here on your chapter outline, and there is an image down there of what's sometimes referred to as the gingerbread or the gingerbread, and it simply is an image that makes the distinction or helps illustrate the distinction between what we mean by sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. And basically what it boils down to is identity, gender identity, the way I think about myself. Am I a boy or a girl? That's in my head. That's a cognitive concept, right? Sexual, and then we have sex, and that refers to what my biology is. We have orientation, or sometimes I've heard it referred to as affectional preference. I don't know that I like that term, but your orientation is the direction of your attraction. So I often describe this concept of, if you ever learned how to use a compass, that was called orienteering, and orienting the direction to which you orient. We can think of gender. I heard this from another colleague of mine. She was talking about gendered energy, right? So you can think, when we were discussing the idea that you have a room full of people and you have very feminine on one end and less feminine on the other, all of those people have a certain kind of gendered energy. So it's a masculine or a feminine gendered energy. And remember, gender, how I act or how I interact with the world, is not tied, is separate from the way my body is. So I might have a body structure of an XX. I might have the anatomy of a female, but I might express myself or have this sort of masculine energy. And so, anyway, to distinguish those things. If you move on to the next box here, or the next slide, there's some other language, some other terms. So we've talked about gender identity, then you have gender expression. That is how I present myself. I might have an identity that I'm female, but I might still dress in a very masculine way. That's your expression. Gender variant sort of is a way of saying I'm neither male nor female. Maybe I don't identify either. I kind of mix those things up. Gender fluid is similar to variant, but it's the idea that maybe in the springtime more of a feminine, but that's all very fluid, and it's very changing. Transgender is simply the word transition and gender, so it's somebody who may be transitioning from masculine to feminine. People don't just wake up and decide that they're no longer female, but this is for health and well-being, this is a process. This is a transitionary process. Cisgender is a new word that was not in the textbooks when I was in school. Cisgender is, I identify as cisgender. It means that my gender identity, the way I think about myself, the way I express myself, and my anatomy are all synced up. I will just out myself right now and tell you that I have a uterus, I have a vagina. That makes me cisgender. Gender roles are when you play the role of the mother or the nurturer or the homemaker. That's a traditional female gender role. The traditional masculine gender role would be disciplinarian, or hunter or protector, or wage earner. Some other terms that are not related to gender as much as they're related to the activity of sex as a verb. You have transsexual. This is someone who's in the process of changing their body, right? Non-op means they're not going to do surgery. They might do hormones. And then, of course, pre-op, they're going to do surgery. Post-op. Hermaphrodite is a very old term that's not used very often anymore. This meant people who were born with both male and female anatomy. The new politically correct term is intrasexed individuals. And actually April is Asexual Awareness Month. So you've got some other terms, orientation, asexual. So asexual is a kind of sexual orientation where people don't have any real sexual desire. They're not heterosexual, they're not homosexual, they're not pansexual, they're nothing. And the asexual community argues that they should be acknowledged as a legit social sexual orientation the same way as hetero or homo. The argument being is that for a long time, if you had no sexual attraction, it was something was considered to be wrong with you. And the asexual community says there ain't nothing wrong with us. We just don't have a sexual attraction. Pansexual is sort of everything. Queer is a term that's being reclaimed by the LGBTQI community. And then another concept is what's referred to as heterosexual privilege. Heterosexual privilege is a phenomena, and again, it's not what it was 20 years ago, but it's a phenomena that says, I can tell you, I can refer to my husband by my husband. I don't have to use code words. I can hold my partner's hand. I have heterosexual privilege. I can talk about my husband, can refer to him. I don't worry about you judging me. I can hold my partner's hand. I don't have to worry about losing my job. All right, that's what we mean by heterosexual privilege. But there have been so many social changes and legal changes that there's not as much privilege. There's still heterosexual privilege, yes, because homosexual people still experience discrimination, but not the way it was when it was legitimately illegal against the law. Right now, homosexual people, same-sex people can get married. Then the next box talks about gender roles. We've already talked about gender roles. There's a little video assignment where I've hooked up some of these videos here about where they turn the gender roles in advertising upside down. That's kind of a fun one to watch. It looks kind of silly. But basically the idea of gender roles, again, is that there's a set, right? There's a set of behaviors that get assigned to women and a set of behaviors that get assigned to men. And that's your gender role. There's something called benevolent sexism. And benevolent sexism is a phenomena that it's a phenomena that when we limit, it's usually referred to as women, referred to or applied to women, but when we limit the movement based on gender, or we limit the opportunities based on gender, we're really doing women primarily a service. So when we say that they can't a classic one, that women shouldn't be in the draft, or women shouldn't be allowed to be warriors in the military or combat soldiers in the military, it's because we're protecting them, right? That's the argument. And benevolent sexism says you're not as much protecting them as you are limiting their opportunities. Their opportunities are not the same as men's opportunities because they're not giving the opportunity to be a combat soldier. If they were given that opportunity, then so if they were allowed to be combat soldiers, then they would have the same promotion opportunities that men would. So we keep women out of certain occupations, all in the name of we're protecting them. That's the argument that we use. But the sexist part is associated with their inability to take advantage of certain social resources. And that's what social gender stratification is about. Gender stratification is about how when women, by structure, by policy, by law, by social norms, are held to positions that have relatively less social rank, there's consequences for this. They don't earn the same amount of pay. All over the world, women are less likely to get the same education. We see fewer women in politics. Also on your assignment, you'll see a little video. In one of those activities, there's a video where women have been photoshopped out of all of these bodies, of these decision-making bodies, of the political bodies, of I think one of them is Congress. And that is what social stratification looks like, right? Is that women are underrepresented all over, well, in the United States at least, women make up 51% of the population. Yet they are not represented at the same proportion in decision-making bodies. So we say the language is women are underrepresented. And what that means is if women were equally represented, if their population at large was reflected in the decision making, there would be 51% of Congress would be made up of women. But that's simply not the case. In many of these bodies, there's one or two women. And that's what we mean by women as a minority group. Women hold less social power all over the world, even though numerically they outnumber men, but they are underrepresented. Their voices are not being heard in, they're not participating in the decision making. All right, so I'm going to wrap this one up, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about patriarchy, some more consequences of social stratification, and hopefully get to the topic of feminism.